This is a message to my Democratic friends as we traverse this really difficult period with this pandemic and all the fears that it engenders. And then on top of it, we have to put up with the incredible lack of leadership at the top, utterly feckless leadership. And yet, the man doesn't quit. He just keeps talking. He keeps making up stories. He keeps shifting the blame. And above all, he gaslights and he gaslights and he gaslights some more. But, you heard me mention the expression snake eyes at the end of a recent video. And this is, in our culture, referring to if you happen to be playing dice in a certain type of game, it's considered the lowest possible roll because it's very low. 1 and 1. It's the lowest you can get, which essentially means your odds of winning are pretty low. And you've heard me say across quite a few charts, previous videos, that Trump's 2020 odds are very low. And the reason I say that is because using Astrology, which is gained by way of the experience of many, many astrologers across thousands of years, and then of course through my own watching and watching and watching across decades of this, when you have a lot of squares, oppositions, half squares, quincunxes, all coming together at the same time, you have a problem. You have a problem, and you may have a big problem. This man's chart is the kind of chart that were it an ordinary, in quotes, individual of his age, I would have said, even in 2017 as he was being inaugurated, that he might want to think about getting his affairs in order. And I mean that. That's the absolute truth. And in fact, if you think back to his election, his moment of glory was essentially between November and January, because by January things got really pitchy, and they've been like that since then. It's been a pitched battle over one thing or another. Yes, a lot of it is self-caused, etc. But nevertheless, that is what he's had in his life, and it's all come to a head in 2020. And to be honest, as I've also said in prior videos, I think in the most unlucky way possible, because, and you can imagine if he had rubbed the bottle and the genie came out and said, well, you'll be president. You can be president if you want. You can have that. And he'd think, wow, amazing. Of course, I'll take it. And she might say, yes, but there are some problems. There are some things that will come up, some conditions. And Donald would probably say, I don't care. I can talk my way out of anything. I can just talk and everything will be fine. And she would say, well, are you sure? Are you sure you want this? And of course he'd say yes, and he'd take the job. And then here we are. Now, what follows this is some clips that I extracted from political experts whose opinions pretty much exactly mirror my own. And what I really like about these opinions is that I didn't get my thinking from them. I simply heard it later after I had worked it out in my own mind. And I tend to think that's more valid in my own case because it reflects a sense of logic. It's similar to astrology. When you see it operating right before your eyes, it really validates the art, science of it, and it encourages you to continue looking and learning. So enjoy the upcoming sound bites that are quite recent. One of them is from about 2 weeks ago, and the other one is from today.
As you look at this, what's the short version of what this is doing to Donald Trump, to his presidency thus far?
Well, first of all, he won with 46.1%. He has literally lost 95% of the elections that have taken place between the time of his election and right now. His polling numbers are going down, and they're awful. Usually in a crisis, I mean, Jimmy Carter was at 67% in the Iran-Contra crisis. The prime minister of Italy is over 70%. I bet you 30 governors in the United States are over 70%. I'm totally unimpressed by President Trump's political powers. I have absolutely no fear. What I do fear of is what you had in Wisconsin, where they try to muck with the election and stop people from voting. But if we go to post in November with anything close to a level playing field, it's going to be a Democratic wipeout. People are not going to vote for 4 more years of this. And I hope that this crisis abates. I totally, we have some encouraging numbers, even in Louisiana, as the governor said, that, I watch them every day. And there is some reason for encouragement. But if you look at even Singapore, they're having the 3rd wave. So we've got a long way to go. But he wouldn't have got elected if this would have never happened. But it did happen, and it's terrible. And I think people are coming together. The social distancing is 90% of people are practicing.
John Heilman, I'm going to go back to one of my pet peeves. I have just a few, John. You know that. But one of them is this whole Donald Trump as political Superman. There is nothing that can stop Donald Trump, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth and putting sackcloth and ashes on people who are just walking around aimlessly saying, how can he get away with this? And what I say is he gets away with nothing. There's a reason why he doesn't get to 50%. There's a reason why he lost Virginia in 17. There's a reason why all of those women in Northern Virginia were standing in the rain for hours saying, we're not going anywhere. We're voting to send a message to Donald Trump. It's why in 2018, when everybody's freaking out about all of his stupid stories about leprosy or whatever he said was coming in these caravans, and why he was sending U.S. troops shamefully down to the border during the holidays. Oh, how can he get away with it? He didn't. Yeah. The biggest historical landslide ever in the House of Representatives in 2018. And now you look at these numbers, it seems that most Americans see what we see. 65% of Americans, let me say this again, 65% of Americans, almost 2 out of 3 Americans saying they do not trust what Donald Trump is telling them. And 65% saying that he wasn't ready, that he was ill-prepared, he did not take this threat seriously enough. Less than 1 out of 3 thinks he took the threat seriously enough. I mean, those are the hardcore tinfoil hat wearing, like, Trumpies. And then, do you trust your governor more, or do you trust the president more? As he's attacking governors, 66% say they trust their governors more. 20% say they trust Trump more. Now look at Fauci. Oh, Fauci, fire. Yeah, that chant, that's really awesome. And boy, we should all freak out about that, because
so you're talking about
that's 8% of Americans don't trust Fauci. Less than 1 in 10 Americans. Again, this is where media really sends, I think, a twisted and warped view of America, because those people should not even be there. 8% of the population. And if that in fact is, people are going to show that, you can say, well, that's less than 1 in 10 Americans who feel that way. Again, I just think the way that this is being covered right now suggests that Donald Trump somehow is getting away with all of these lies. Somehow is getting away with all the shift blaming. It's just not happening if you look at these polls.
Right. So, Joe, the president has not been on a ballot for now 3.5 years. And the story of the Trump administration in those 3.5 years, when Donald Trump's name has never been directly on a ballot anywhere, there have been a lot of elections. There have been congressional elections. There have been midterm elections, off-year elections. Most recently up in Wisconsin, we had elections. We had a Democratic primary, and we had an election for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Local elections, by-elections, all kinds of elections. The Republican Party in those elections over the last 3.5 years has gotten its clock cleaned systematically. And I think everyone in politics understands that although Donald Trump's name has never been on the ballot directly, his name has been on the ballot in some sense in all of those elections because he's the dominant force in American politics. So every one of these elections is in some sense a referendum on Trump. He makes himself directly part of many of those elections, as we saw in that Wisconsin Supreme Court seat that Friday before when he said, they're trying to cancel the election because I put out an endorsement I endorsed this man very strongly on social media and his polls went through the roof within, he was claiming that his polls had gone up within hours of when Trump had endorsed him.
Right.
So you've got, 3.5 years of Trump paying a political price and the Republican Party paying a political price. And now you look at the polling, and again, there's a lot of months between now and November. We're in an unprecedented situation. There's a lot of politics to play, and I think people should understand that this is a very dynamic, a situation that's very dynamic and very much in flux. But right now, on the basis of the numbers that we see, it's clear that just as the Republican Party has lost almost every ballot test for the last 3.5 years, Donald Trump is losing the battle for public opinion right now on the handling of this virus. And you can see it not just in those direct approval numbers and his overall approval number, the approval number on how he's handling the virus, but you see the fact that right now, it's also the case that in that most recent Pew poll, it's about 2/3 of the country thinks the greater risk right now is to reopen the economy too soon, as opposed to the third of the country that thinks the greater risk is to keep the lockdown orders in place and risk the economy. So again, Trump's all in a rush to reopen. The country doesn't want to reopen right now. 2/3 of the country says that's the risky course. Trump's losing that argument too. So I think you're right. I mean, again, lots to play for here, but Trump's losing right now, and the party has lost with him at its head a lot over the last 3.5 years.